the age of social media, where likes and friend requests often feel harmless, a darker reality hides behind the glowing screens. This is the story of a trap laid on Facebook. A honey trap that would not only expose a dangerous predator, but also unravel a shocking tale of manipulation, greed, and cold-blooded murder. Imagine scrolling through your feed, chatting casually with someone who seems genuine, only to discover later that every word was a carefully crafted lie designed to lure you into danger. That is the chilling foundation of this case, a reminder that trust given online can sometimes become the deadliest mistake. Tonight, we travel into the depths of a crime where Facebook became the hunting ground, where a fake profile became a weapon, and where investigators had to think like predators themselves to catch the killer. This isn't just a story about a murder, it's about betrayal, obsession, and the clever game of cat and mouse that finally brought justice to the victim's grieving family. But before the shocking ending, you must walk through the same shadows the investigators walked through. You will feel the tension, the frustration, and the small sparks of hope that kept them going. This is not just another crime. It is a digital battlefield where one wrong click could mean death. Welcome to the Facebook honey trap, catching a killer. The story begins in a quiet town where life moved at its own slow pace. People knew each other, streets were calm, and there was little suspicion of anything sinister brewing beneath the surface. But that peace shattered the day a young woman was found brutally murdered in her own home. She was vibrant, loved by many, and her sudden death left an entire community numb with shock. No one could understand how such a horrific crime had crept into their world. The crime scene told a disturbing tale. There were no signs of forced entry, no burglary, nothing to suggest a random act of violence. Instead, it seemed almost personal, as if the killer knew exactly what they were doing. The woman's phone lay on the table, notifications buzzing, messages still unread. Investigators quickly realized that her digital life might hold the key to solving the mystery. As detectives dug into her social media, Facebook stood out like a beacon. Her profile showed interactions with several people, but one in particular raised alarms, a man she had been chatting with frequently in the weeks before her death. At first glance, he appeared charming, caring, and attentive, everything you would expect from someone trying to win her trust. But something about him didn't add up. Friends of the victim revealed that she had mentioned this new friend several times, sometimes with excitement, sometimes with caution. She wasn't sure if he was who he claimed to be. She had even told one close friend that she felt she was being watched, that the online conversations were starting to bleed into her real life. It was as if her digital world and physical reality were merging into something dangerous. Police traced the account, only to discover it wasn't straightforward. The profile was carefully constructed, photos stolen from random corners of the internet, details that were vague enough to avoid detection, yet specific enough to seem real. Whoever was behind it had crafted a perfect mask. Investigators were staring at a phantom, someone who had lured the victim in with sweet words but remained hidden in the shadows. The deeper they looked, the more unsettling it became. This wasn't just a casual online flirtation gone wrong. It was deliberate. Every message seemed calculated, every conversation a step closer to manipulation. The honey trap was already set, and tragically, the victim had walked right into it. But who was the puppeteer behind the screen, and why had this friendship ended in blood? The detectives knew that answering this would be the first step toward catching a killer. As investigators dug deeper into the Facebook account, they began to notice a disturbing pattern. The killer hadn't just created one fake profile. There were several, all interconnected, all carefully designed to target vulnerable women in the area. Each profile used stolen pictures, each carried a different backstory, and all were laced with just enough charm to disarm suspicion. It was as though the killer had built a digital web, and the victim had been one of the many flies caught in its threads. But while others had managed to escape, she had been chosen as the final target. Detectives knew that behind the polished lies was someone calculating and patient, someone who didn't rush. They studied the messages exchanged between the victim and the phantom profile. What they found was chilling. At first, the tone was playful, casual compliments, jokes, friendly conversations. But gradually, the words grew more personal, more manipulative. The friend showered her with attention when she was vulnerable, played on her insecurities, and convinced her that he was the only one who truly understood her. It was the oldest trick in the predator's handbook, emotional entrapment. The victim, young and trusting, began to confide in this stranger. She revealed her routines, her fears, even her arguments with family and friends. What she didn't realize was that every piece of information she shared was being stored, cataloged, and used against her. This wasn't an innocent online friendship, it was surveillance wrapped in affection. The killer was studying her life like a blueprint, preparing for the moment he would step out of the digital shadows and into her real world. Investigators traced the IP addresses linked to the fake profiles, but each time they were led to dead ends, public Wi-Fi spots, proxy servers, and cleverly masked signals. Whoever this person was, he was not only manipulative but technologically skilled. It was becoming clear that they weren't dealing with a random attacker. This was someone who planned meticulously, someone who had done this before. Every step the police took forward, the phantom seemed to be one step ahead. The community, meanwhile, was restless. Rumors spread quickly. Some believed it was a scorned lover. Others whispered about a stalker who had been seen in the neighborhood late at night. Fear gripped families, and parents warned their daughters not to accept friend requests from strangers. The once silent town now lived under a cloud of suspicion, as if the killer could be hiding behind any face in the crowd, or worse, behind any friendly message on Facebook. Yet amid all the fear, detectives found a small spark of hope. In one of the victim's final messages, she had mentioned meeting this friend in person. That meeting could have been the moment everything changed, the point where digital manipulation crossed into brutal reality. If they could uncover where and when that meeting happened, they might finally catch a glimpse of the person behind the mask. The race was on, and time was slipping through their fingers like sand. Detectives began retracing the victim's final days, searching for any clue about the supposed meeting she had arranged with her Facebook friend. Phone records showed a series of calls and text messages, but none were from a registered number. Instead, they were routed through disposable SIM cards, purchased under fake identities. It was clear that whoever orchestrated this had taken steps to erase their footprints. Still, hidden in the phone's data logs, investigators discovered a location ping near an abandoned cafe on the outskirts of town, a place that had long since closed down, a place where no one would think to look. The cafe itself was a haunting sight. Dust covered the floors, broken chairs were scattered across the room, and shattered glass reflected faint beams of light. But what sent chills down the investigators' spines was what they found outside. A single cigarette butt, still fresh, and tire marks leading away from the building. They bagged the evidence, praying it would hold DNA or some trace that could finally expose the killer. For the first time, they had a physical connection between the digital predator and the real world. As the investigation grew, so did the profile of the suspect. Criminal psychologists brought onto the case painted a picture of a man who thrived on control, someone who enjoyed the process of manipulation as much as the act of violence itself. This was no impulsive attacker. This was a predator who stalked, studied, and planned with precision. His use of fake profiles was not just about hiding. It was about creating multiple masks, ensuring no one could ever see the real face beneath. The honey trap wasn't just a tactic, it was his identity. Meanwhile, the victim's family was drowning in grief. Her mother described her as warm and trusting, someone who saw the good in everyone. Hearing that her daughter had been lured through Facebook broke her in ways words couldn't describe. She blamed herself, saying she should have warned her more strongly about the dangers of online friendships. Investigators sat with the family, listening to their pain, silently vowing that they would not let this case fade into unsolved shadows. The hunt for justice became deeply personal, but as the police grew closer, strange things began to happen. Fake profiles that had been dormant suddenly vanished. Entire message threads were deleted in real time, as if the killer knew he was being watched. It was as though he was mocking the authorities, erasing his trail with a smirk from behind the screen. Every time investigators thought they had a breakthrough, it slipped through their hands. The phantom wasn't just hiding, he was playing with them, enjoying the game. Still, there was one mistake he couldn't undo. In one of the chats, buried among dozens of flattering words and manipulative promises, the victim had mentioned her plan to meet him on a Thursday night at the cafe. That meeting never appeared in any of her calls or texts, but it was there in the chat logs. It was proof that he had stepped out from the digital realm into the real world, and that very step would become the crack in his armor. The trap he had set for his victim was about to turn into the very net that could capture him. The discovery of the cafe as a meeting point gave investigators a crucial lead, but they needed more than just tire marks and cigarette butts. They needed to place a real person at that location with undeniable evidence. Forensic teams combed through the area, inch by inch, hoping for even the smallest detail. Then, buried in the dust under one of the broken tables, they found something chilling, a tiny fragment of fabric, torn as if caught in a sharp corner. Testing later confirmed it belonged to the victim's clothing. The cafe wasn't just a meeting spot. It had been part of the crime scene. What unsettled the detectives even more was how meticulously the killer had tried to cover his tracks. There were no fingerprints, no shoe impressions, nothing except those tire marks and a single cigarette. But sometimes it's the smallest mistakes that break open the biggest cases. The cigarette butt was sent to the lab, and while results would take weeks, investigators hoped it would carry the DNA of the phantom they were hunting. Until then, they needed another plan to keep the pressure on. That's when the idea of a reverse honey trap was born. If the killer was using Facebook as his hunting ground, maybe it was time to turn the game back on him. Undercover officers created their own fake profiles, mirroring the same kind of characters the killer often targeted: young, vulnerable women with stories that would attract sympathy. The hope was that by casting this net, the predator would reveal himself, unable to resist the bait he so often used against others. At the same time, the victim's family was struggling with the media attention. News outlets had seized the story, painting the case as a cautionary tale of online dangers. While some people expressed sympathy, others cruelly blamed the victim for being too trusting. This public judgment only deepened the wounds of her loved ones, who insisted she was not foolish, she was kind, open-hearted, and tragically deceived by someone who had mastered the art of lies. The family's anguish gave investigators even more determination to bring the predator to justice. Weeks passed, and slowly the trap began to stir. One of the undercover profiles received a message from an account that bore striking similarities to the phantom's previous identities. The writing style was familiar: calculated compliments, probing questions, and an eerie patience. The officers behind the fake profile responded carefully, mirroring the same kind of interest the victim had shown, but this time with eyes wide open. They were no longer prey, they were hunters, waiting for the killer to make his move. But the danger of this operation was immense. If the suspect sensed even the slightest hint of deception, he would vanish again, deleting everything, leaving investigators with nothing but shadows. The police were playing a delicate game of balance, dangling bait while tightening their grip, praying the killer wouldn't notice the trap closing around him. Every chat, every word exchanged was laced with tension because behind the screen was a murderer who believed he was still in control. And if he discovered the truth too soon, the chance to stop him might be lost forever. The undercover officers pored over every detail of the messages coming from the new account. The writing style was hauntingly familiar: long pauses between replies, sudden shifts from charm to probing personal questions, and a strange obsession with knowing someone's exact location. It was the same pattern the victim had fallen into, the same methodical grooming that slowly turned friendliness into control. The killer was circling again, believing he had found another vulnerable soul. But this time he wasn't speaking to an unsuspecting woman. He was walking straight into a net of steel. The officers behind the profile played their roles carefully. They acted shy, hesitant at first, then gradually opened up as the predator pushed for trust. They revealed small, harmless details about their life, allowing the suspect to feel as though he was in control. Behind the scenes, digital experts traced every message, logging IP addresses, timing, and behavior. And while many of the technical traces were masked, there were tiny inconsistencies. Moments where the phantom slipped, moments when the mask cracked. The killer's arrogance was his weakness. As the conversations deepened, the suspect began to grow bolder. He suggested meeting in person, using the same kind of casual tone he had once used with the victim. He proposed a quiet location, late at night, far from the eyes of the public. The similarity was chilling. It was almost an exact replica of how he had lured the victim to her death. The investigators knew they had to tread carefully. Agreeing to meet too quickly might scare him off, but delaying too long risked losing his interest. The balance between patience and action became razor thin. While the trap was being prepared, the victim's family continued to live in torment. They couldn't sleep without nightmares of how she might have suffered. Her younger sister admitted she no longer trusted social media at all, terrified that someone might be watching her too. The pain in their eyes gave the detectives more fuel to press forward. They had seen families broken before, but something about this case, the manipulation, the cruelty, the premeditation, struck a deeper chord. This wasn't just about solving a crime anymore. It was about restoring faith, proving that monsters who hide behind screens could still be unmasked. And then came the breakthrough. During one of the chats, the suspect accidentally revealed a detail that wasn't in the fabricated profile he was using. He mentioned a specific local landmark, something only a person from the town would know. To investigators, it was like gold dust. Proof that the killer wasn't hiding in another state or country, but right there among them, blending into the very community he had terrorized. The phantom wasn't a distant figure. He was close, watching, walking the same streets as everyone else. With this discovery, the urgency doubled. Plans were made to agree to the meeting, but this time, every corner would be covered by surveillance. Officers disguised as bystanders, unmarked cars hidden in the shadows, cameras ready to capture every move. For weeks they had chased a ghost, and now they were about to look into the eyes of the man who had lured a woman to her death. The honey trap that began on Facebook was about to close, and the hunters braced themselves for the moment when predator and prey would finally trade places. The night of the planned meeting arrived, and the air was thick with anticipation. The undercover officer, posing as the bait, had agreed to meet the suspect at a quiet park just outside of town. The location was eerily similar to the abandoned cafe where the victim had once been lured, almost as if the killer had a signature setting, isolated, silent, with no one to hear the cries of danger. This time, however, hidden in the darkness, the place was surrounded by officers, every shadow concealing a watchful eye. They knew they had only one chance to capture him without spooking him. As the minutes ticked by, every sound seemed louder, the crunch of leaves, the faint hum of crickets, even the officer's own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Then finally footsteps approached. A figure emerged from the shadows, his hood pulled low, his pace steady and cautious. He paused often, scanning his surroundings, as if paranoid but confident that he was still in control. To him, this was just another night of conquest. To the police, it was the night they would end the nightmare. The undercover officer played her part perfectly, feigning nervousness, stuttering slightly in her messages as she texted him updates. She pretended to be hesitant about showing up, mirroring the kind of doubt an innocent young woman might have. The suspect took the bait, replying with calculated reassurance, promising safety, promising that he wasn't like other men. These were the very lies he had used on the victim, recycled and polished, but this time, every word was being recorded, every move documented. As the figure stepped closer, detectives hidden nearby exchanged silent signals. Snipers were in position, plainclothes officers scattered like shadows. Every detail of the operation had been rehearsed 100 times, but the reality of the moment brought a heavy weight to everyone's chest. What if he ran? What if he had a weapon? What if, in his desperation, he lashed out violently? The tension was unbearable, a taut string ready to snap at the smallest spark. When the suspect finally spoke, the officers froze. His voice was calm, chillingly ordinary, the kind of voice you could hear from any neighbor on the street. But in that ordinariness was something far more sinister, the realization that monsters often wear the plainest masks. He called out the fake name of the undercover profile, waiting for her to step into the light. And just as he moved closer, ready to close the final distance, the command was whispered through hidden earpieces. Now! In an instant, the park erupted. Officers surged from the darkness, surrounding the suspect in a flash of movement. He tried to run, but a wall of bodies blocked every escape. The hood was ripped back, and for the first time, investigators saw the face of the phantom they had chased for months. He wasn't extraordinary, wasn't the genius manipulator his digital disguise had suggested. He looked like an ordinary man, the kind you might pass on the street without noticing. And yet, behind those eyes was the cold shadow of a predator who had weaponized trust, who had turned Facebook into a hunting ground. The honey trap had finally caught the killer. The arrest sent a ripple of shock through the entire town. When the suspect's face appeared in the flashing lights of the police vehicles, neighbors and bystanders who had gathered couldn't believe their eyes. He wasn't the shadowy, monstrous figure people had imagined. He was someone they had seen countless times before, someone who blended into the background so effortlessly that no one had ever suspected him. That revelation sent shivers down spines, the idea that a predator had been hiding in plain sight, wearing a mask of normality every day. Back at the station, investigators wasted no time. They sat him down in the interrogation room, and for hours he refused to say a word. His silence was deafening, his smirk infuriating. He seemed to enjoy watching the detectives grow frustrated, as though this was yet another game to him. But then, when they revealed the evidence they had gathered, the chat logs, the undercover conversations, and most importantly, the DNA from the cigarette butt, his composure cracked. The phantom behind the Facebook honey trap was cornered, and for the first time he realized the walls around him were closing in. Bit by bit, the story began to unravel. He confessed not with shame, but with a twisted sense of pride, recounting how easy it had been to manipulate strangers online. He spoke of how vulnerable people were when hiding behind screens, how simple it was to steal photos, create identities, and become whoever he needed to be to earn their trust. His words dripped with arrogance, each sentence a chilling reminder of how far he had gone to master the art of deception. For him, it wasn't just about control, it was about proving that he could outsmart anyone. Detectives listened, some with clenched fists, as he casually described luring the victim. He spoke about her kindness, her trust, her openness, and twisted those very qualities into weaknesses he could exploit. There was no remorse in his voice, only the cold satisfaction of someone who believed he had played the perfect game. What he didn't realize was that his arrogance was building the very case that would destroy him. Every word he spoke became another nail in his coffin. Meanwhile, the victim's family was informed of the arrest. Relief washed over them, but so did an unexpected storm of emotions. Her mother wept, saying she could never forgive herself for letting her daughter meet someone she barely knew. Her father clenched his fists in silence, his eyes burning with both grief and rage. Justice might have been on the horizon, but it didn't erase the hole left in their lives. Their daughter would never come back. And the cruel irony was that the man responsible had been living freely among them all along. But the investigation wasn't over. Police began digging into his past, determined to uncover whether this was his first crime or just the first time he had been caught. As they scrolled through his digital footprint, evidence emerged of countless other women he had targeted, conversations eerily similar to the ones with the victim. Some had pulled away before meeting him, others had blocked him when things grew uncomfortable. But each profile told the same story, a predator prowling through Facebook, leaving a trail of manipulation behind. The truth was darker than anyone expected. This wasn't a one-time act of violence. This was a pattern. As investigators peeled back the layers of the suspect's online life, they were stunned by the scale of his deception. He hadn't just created 2 or 3 fake profiles. There were dozens. Each one had a distinct persona, carefully crafted to appeal to different types of women. Some profiles posed as sensitive artists, others as ambitious young professionals, and some as lonely men searching for connection. He had built an entire digital army of false identities, each one designed to lure and ensnare. It was clear this was not a man acting on impulse. This was a predator who treated manipulation like an art form. The deeper they went, the more disturbing it became. Investigators discovered that he kept detailed records of his victims. Hidden in his computer was a folder, encrypted but eventually unlocked, containing screenshots of conversations, stolen photographs, and notes about each woman's personality. He had studied them like a hunter studies prey, noting weaknesses, fears, and emotional triggers. The victim whose life he had taken was not an exception. She was the culmination of years of practice, years of rehearsing the perfect honey trap until he was confident enough to strike. This discovery rattled the investigators. It meant that the victim's tragedy wasn't just the result of bad luck or a random encounter. It was the endpoint of a deliberate, calculated process. The killer had built his trap over years, perfecting it through trial and error. That realization made the case even more haunting. How many others had narrowly escaped his web? How many more could have been his victims if he hadn't finally been caught? These questions gnawed at everyone working the case. When this information was presented in court, it painted a terrifying picture for the jury. The defense tried to argue that he was mentally unstable, that his actions were the result of delusion rather than intent. But the evidence told a different story. This was not the chaos of a disturbed mind, but the cold order of a planner. Each message, each fake profile, each step was deliberate. He wasn't insane. He was cruelly intelligent, and he had chosen to use that intelligence for destruction. The community watched the trial with a mixture of relief and horror. Relief that he had finally been caught, but horror at how close so many others had come to being his victims. Parents spoke openly about deleting their children's social media accounts. Schools held emergency assemblies warning about the dangers of online strangers, and Facebook itself was pressured to review its safety protocols. The ripple effect of this one predator's actions spread far beyond a single family's tragedy. It forced an entire town to question the very trust they placed in their digital connections. And yet, amid the rising awareness, the victim's family sat quietly in the courtroom, carrying a pain that no justice could fully heal. Her mother clutched a framed photograph, her sister avoided the suspect's eyes, and her father's jaw remained clenched, his silence heavier than any words could be. For them, every revelation was salt in an open wound, every detail of his manipulation a reminder of the daughter, the sister, they had lost forever. They weren't just listening to evidence. They were reliving their nightmare in slow motion, with the world watching. The courtroom atmosphere was electric when the prosecution laid out their final piece of evidence, the undercover operation that had led to his capture. Jurors listened intently as officers described how they had built a fake profile, how they had baited him into revealing himself, and how he had fallen for the very trick he had used to prey on others. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The hunter had been caught in his own trap. This revelation didn't just prove his guilt, it shattered the carefully constructed image he had built of being untouchable. For the first time, he was stripped of power, exposed for what he truly was, a manipulator who believed his lies were stronger than truth. The defense scrambled, trying to portray him as a lonely man seeking affection, someone whose actions spiraled out of control. But every attempt crumbled under the weight of evidence. The chat logs, the DNA, the recorded undercover exchanges, they all painted a picture too clear to ignore. This wasn't a man who had made a mistake. This was a man who had engineered a deadly game. The jury could see it, the public could feel it, and the suspect himself began to realize the walls were closing in for good. Throughout the trial, the victim's family sat bravely, though their grief was evident in every tear and every glance toward the accused. For them, this wasn't just about punishment. It was about showing the world who their daughter really was, kind, trusting, and undeserving of the fate she had met. Her mother often whispered that she wished her daughter had never opened Facebook, never accepted that friend request. But those wishes were shadows of what-ifs, impossible to change. The courtroom wasn't just a place of justice. It was a battlefield of memory, where their love for her fought against the darkness that had taken her away. When the prosecution delivered its closing argument, the silence in the courtroom was suffocating. They reminded the jury of how the killer had stolen not just a life, but also peace, innocence, and trust. They spoke of how he had hidden behind screens, how he had perfected his lies, and how he had used kindness as a weapon. The image of the victim's final days, smiling at her phone, believing she had found a friend, was etched into everyone's minds. The contrast between her innocence and his cruelty was too sharp to ignore. The jury deliberated for hours, each moment stretching endlessly for the family who waited. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered, chanting for justice, holding up candles, and sharing stories of how this case had changed their perception of online safety. Some carried posters with the victim's photo, her smile shining like a haunting reminder of what was lost. The town had come together not just in grief, but in determination, vowing never to let such a predator roam free again. Finally, the jury returned. As the foreman stood, the entire room held its breath. The words fell heavy and final. Guilty. The verdict echoed through the courtroom, breaking the silence like thunder. The suspect lowered his head, his arrogance drained, his smirk gone. For the victim's family, it was a bittersweet moment. Justice had been served, but their daughter would never return. Tears flowed freely, hugs were exchanged, and for the first time since the nightmare began, there was a fragile sense of closure. But even then, one haunting question remained. How many more predators like him were still hiding behind glowing screens, waiting for their next prey? The guilty verdict was just the beginning of the final chapter. As the judge delivered the sentence, life imprisonment without parole, the courtroom erupted with emotion. The family sobbed, some with relief, others with grief that felt sharper than ever. The suspect stood motionless, his expression unreadable, but his silence spoke volumes. For a man who once lived through deception and control, he now had no control left, no masks to wear, and no audience to manipulate. His world of lies had collapsed around him, leaving him with nothing but the cold reality of his punishment. In prison, his arrogance would fade. No longer could he hide behind Facebook profiles. No longer could he weave digital webs to lure innocent lives. He was stripped of power, left only with the haunting knowledge of what he had done and the lives he had scarred forever. Yet even as the family found a measure of justice, their pain remained. The sentence didn't bring their daughter back, didn't erase the nights of crying, didn't undo the betrayal of trust that had cost them everything. Justice had come, but healing would take a lifetime. The case itself, however, left a legacy. It forced conversations in schools and homes and on social platforms worldwide. Parents began teaching their children about online predators, warning them that not every smiling profile picture hides a friend. Tech companies faced mounting pressure to do more, to screen accounts, to track patterns, to stop predators before they could strike. The tragedy had opened eyes in a way no public campaign ever could. It turned pain into awareness, and awareness into protection. But for investigators, the story carried a darker reminder. They knew this man wasn't unique. He had simply been the one who slipped up, the one who left a cigarette butt and fell into his own trap. There were others out there, hiding in the glow of screens, sending friend requests, spinning words of comfort that masked intentions of control. The honey trap case wasn't just solved, it was a warning flare in the night sky. A reminder that the world of digital predators was larger, darker, and far more dangerous than anyone wanted to admit. The victim's family tried to move forward, holding vigils each year, reminding people of her kindness and urging others to be cautious online. Her name became a symbol of resilience, her story a lesson etched into the collective memory of the town. Her sister once said in an interview with tears in her eyes, "If even one girl thinks twice before trusting a stranger online because of my sister's story, then her death wasn't in vain." Those words carried the weight of tragedy and the strength of survival, echoing far beyond the walls of their home. And so, the honey trap that began as a sinister web of lies ended in both justice and heartbreak. A predator was caged, a family forever scarred, and a community awakened. But the digital shadows remain, filled with whispers and threats unseen. Because while this story found an ending, the danger itself never truly ends. Behind every friend request could hide another predator, waiting for another chance. And that is the chilling truth of the Facebook honey trap, catching a killer. A story that began with trust, twisted into betrayal, and ended in a courtroom where justice fought to match the weight of grief. But as we close this case, one haunting thought lingers. How many more honey traps are waiting out there just a click away? This case reminds us all that evil doesn't always come with warning signs. It often wears a friendly smile, hides behind kind words, and waits for the perfect moment to strike. The victim's story is not just about what was lost, but about what we must all protect: our safety, our trust, our lives. If this story made your heart race, if it left you questioning just how safe we really are online, then stay with us. Because the shadows of the digital world hold countless more mysteries, and many more predators still lurk in the silence. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and join us as we uncover more chilling true crime stories that remind us that sometimes the greatest danger isn't out there in the dark, it's already on our screens. So, I'll leave you with a question. If someone you trust online suddenly revealed themselves to be a predator, would you recognize the signs before it was too late? Think carefully, because as this case shows, one mistake can cost everything. Until next time, stay safe, stay cautious, and stay with us for the next story that will send shivers down your spine.